Hello, and a warm welcome to the Swords and Brushes YouTube channel. On this channel, I will cover all things Lord of the Rings and Middle-earth related to painting miniatures and making scenery. So if that is something that you would enjoy watching, then please angrily stare at the like button and then call him a fool of a took. And now, let's create some 𝗔𝗄 𝗍𝗂𝗂𝗍. I'm going to start today's video with a top tip. Now the vast amount of the Middle-earth range comes with slaughter bases just like these. So I'm going to fill the gap by using some 𝗕𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗍 masking tape and cutting lengths to the size I need. For my hobby, I try to be as efficient as I can, and I will tend to batch paint bases in one go. This could be anything from 10 bases up to 100. So I paint the bases and the miniatures separately and super glue the models on at the end, after I cut off the unwanted tab section under the feet. This is my personal preference, but others may like to do the basing whilst the miniatures are attached. There is no right or wrong in any case, as long as you find your own method that works for you and you're comfortable with it, then I'm sure you'll be pleased with the end result. To create our 𝗕𝗄 𝗍𝗂𝗂𝗍 bases today, we will need the following materials. Some sand. Here I'm using bird sand from the Pet Isle. This stuff is great, as it has ground up shells in the sand and it creates a nice texture for dry brushing. I also have some bits of MDF, which was some excess material from a model kit. I will be using these for the stone blocks. But you can also use any leftover sprue from plastic kits to the same effect. Now I am sure we all have this material floating around at home. We will need a pencil, one which you will never write with again, and some plastic food packaging from the recycle bin. And finally some glues, both PVA and super glue, although just PVA will be fine for this project. And of course some gold glitter, which you can find in a craft store, and this will be used for our bounty of gold coins. Firstly, we need to create our stone blocks. For this, I will cut the MDF into small rectangular pieces using some clippers. I like to use some inexpensive clippers from the DIY store, instead of the pricier hobby ones, as they are more heavy duty and I feel more comfortable with them for this task. I will simply choose where I want to cut and then cut my hand around so any clip material won't fly off in random directions. For an extra safety measure, I will also wear some safety glasses so I won't chance at something heading towards my face. You could also wear a glove, but I have found this not to be necessary. To make the stones look a bit battered, I will add some small chips carefully using a craft knife. Now I am confident using the blade in this way. But for a safer method, you could lay the MDF on a flat surface, or use a vise and then create your marks on the stone. For the stone columns, I will use a pencil that wants to be something more in life, and take away the outer painted layer, exposing the wood. This takes the paint better when we will get round to that later on. You could either use sandpaper or carefully scrape it with a hobby knife like so. I find the latter method to work the easiest for me. We just need to cut the pencil using the hobby saw to create our columns. At this stage, don't worry about cutting them perfectly square. In fact, having them at a slight angle would be better, as it would look like they have fallen down onto the ground or just sticking up out of it, to suggest that they've been there for quite a while. The ends of the pencil which will be exposed needs to be flattened off. The circular lead still will show through once painted. You could either use some sandpaper or a bit of super glue and that will do the trick nicely. We first need to glue our stone blocks and columns onto the base before gluing the sand on. If we did this after the sand, then it would look like these heavy stone blocks would be floating on the sand surface and not compressing the ground beneath it. You can use PVA glue here, but I prefer super glue because of the quicker drying time. Once the stones are in position, then we can apply the sand onto the base. I've mounted the bases onto some Lego using blue tack. It's a very inexpensive paint handle and I love using this method. Okay, let's apply the glue. To do this, I would suggest using a cheap brush which you could buy from a bargain store. or a popular online retailer, and you can name it your glue brush. Please do not use your expensive miniature brushes for this stage. If you get any glue on the rim of the base, then it's very easy to wipe off with a finger. I tend to do this after applying the sand. Of course, there are texture paints out there on the market, so if you're more than comfortable using them, then the end results will be similar. Whilst our PVA glue is drying on the bases, we will now create some pages which we can scatter over some of the bases. This is similar to what you will see in 𝗵𝗁's tomb in the film. For this, all we need is some plastic food packaging from the recycling bin. I'm using a mushroom carton here, and I will simply cut out some small rectangles using some scissors. To simulate them being torn and battered, you could also use your clippers and add marks onto the page and bend a few corners in as well. Once the glue has dried on our bases, we can glue into position our scattered pages. Again, PVA glue is fine, but super glue is much quicker. Now that the bases have been created, we need to undercoat them black before we start painting them. So I will take these away and spray them. And now for the painting stage. To start off, we will be using some hardened carapace by Army Painter. This step and the next is straight out of the pot. No watering down the paint is required. We can use our good old glue brush for this, as we don't need to be too precise at the moment. It just needs a good layer to cover over our black. Our next paint, Dungeon Grey, will be applied over the majority of the base and the rubble. I use a couple of techniques here. Firstly, the normal brush strokes to get the most coverage, and then also prodding the brush to create patches. At this stage, we do not need to cover the whole of the previous layer. We would want some darker sections to show through. Whilst we have the paint out, we can water it down slightly and paint the first thin layer of the base rim. Now for some added colour. Small patches of green was applied to give an earthy tone to the sand and the rubble. This could simulate some organic growth, or just the natural colour of the area of the mine. But it also gives the base a nicer visual once the models have been glued on. Now my favourite part of painting a base, the dry brushing stage. This is where we add some clarity to the texture of that lovely sand and rubble that we've created. To dry brush, I added some paint onto a palette and then lifted a small amount onto our flat brush. Using a kitchen towel, the paint was taken off the bristles until only a small amount was left on the brush. And then slowly at first, I painted the base, gliding the bristles over the textures. The paint will hit all the top areas, leaving a nice result for us at the end. A tip here is to not add too much pressure and see how much paint is coming off the brush before committing. It's better to do a few thin layers rather than a gloopy one where there is too much paint on the brush. We now have our dry brush bases. We can stop here, but I'm going to add just a quick highlight of mummy robes to some of the edges of the rubble and the shells in the sand to bring out the shapes a little more. The pages, which are scattered over a number of our bases, was given a base coat of Banshee Brown. And then to make them look aged, a small amount of shade was added. For this we used soft tone and watered down this slightly, so once it has dried it will create some stained watermarks for our pages. Some scripts were then added using a fine tip brush and a small amount of paint on the tip. Effectively, you want to try and paint little scribbles and or dots to represent the written text. You can use a variation of colours for this, however the main colour used here was oak brown. Lastly, the pages were given a highlight to lift them from the darker grey sand which they lay on. I mainly highlighted by painting lots of dots rather than a crisp clean highlight. This further suggests that the pages are worn and have been there for quite some time. And now we are going to work on our gold before Smell gets there. We are going to create a mound of gold for our bases, so we need to prepare these by creating a bump for the coins to sit on. I used some blue tack for this as it's an inexpensive material, but you could also use clay or modelling putty, which will give the same results. To flatten the edges of these, a sculpting tool was used. The rest of the base was then completed using the steps from earlier in the video. Now for the fun bit. I purchased some glitter for these bases, however there are some various sizes that came in the bag, and I wanted to separate the larger shapes. Rather than doing this by hand, I had the perfect tool for this, my 𝗕𝗶𝗿𝗁𝗂 grass applicator. This is a fantastic tool to have in any miniature painter's arsenal, and we will be seeing more of this in future videos. But for now, I just wanted the detachable nozzle with the mesh fitting, as you can see here. I poured the glitter from a used spray can lid into the nozzle and separated the smaller pieces of glitter into an empty spice shaker. The larger pieces of glitter will be used later, so put them to one side. We used PVA glue and covered the blue tack bump. And then added a first layer of the larger shaped glitter. This technically is our glitter base coat, as we are looking for coverage at this point. Once the first layer has dried, we add another layer of PVA glue to the glitter. And this time we use the smaller shape version from the spice shaker. This smaller glitter looks more in line with the size of a gold coin that the scale of the miniatures are in. Look at that shine. Another tip here is to use non-stick baking paper. This is super when doing anything that's a bit messy. I think I've used quite a few items from the kitchen for this video today. Now we need to make this gold mount sturdy and not fall apart whilst our potential miniature would be transported from game to game. Watered down PVA glue is perfect for this, but I added an extra stage here and used some isopropanol alcohol and applied a small amount to the gold using a pipette. This liquid is used by a lot of scenery builders out there. Using this allows our watered down PVA glue to flow into the crevices of the glitter a lot easier, and once dry will make our material stronger. The gold is set, and at the moment it's super blingy. So we're going to paint it to bring this down a touch and also create some shaded areas too to make it visually more appealing. To start off, flesh wash was applied all over the gold, and once dried it will knock back some of that initial shine. Another layer of this could be added here, however I chose to use nut brown ink by Winsor & Newton. Inks have a high pigmentation to them and gives a rich colour. This has been applied on our gold after the flesh wash from the previous stage has fully dried. It too takes away some shine but also intensifies the shaded areas as well. The gold coins are nearly there. At this stage it will be more than good enough for our bases, but I'm going to add 2 more steps to make them look miniature painted rather than plastic glitter as it once was. Our haul of gold coins was given a layer of bright gold. This was painted on most of the coins, but not all of them. Finally, some coins were painted with shining silver. And lastly, all of the bases from the video today were given a final coat of dungeon grey for the rims. And there we have it, we have some not so blingy gold bases for our miniatures to fight over. And we will expand more into this in the future, as we will dive deeper into the Mines of Moria for this series, so keep your eyes out for more content. I would love to say thank you so much for tuning in and watching this video today. If you have found value in the video today, or simply like some of my tips and tricks, then please do let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe, and maybe tell a friend if they have some Mines of Moria games to play. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep on hobbying.